Hello, Demian. How are you doing today?
I'm fantastic, Behdad. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for joining us on the podcast. Really excited to hear your insights on what's going on with ESG. I heard there's some new programs and some new changes to the regulation. So, super excited to dive in and see what's going to happen and what our clients will need to face in the coming years. So, before we get started, I just want to give you a chance to give an introduction on yourself. I am Behdad Bahrami. I'm the founder of Edgecom Energy. At Edgecom Energy, we help large industrial facilities take advantage of energy programs, and we help them simplify the energy transition. So we have a whole suite of energy software offerings that help large industrial facilities take advantage of the programs that are coming out through the energy transition, leads to cost savings and emission reduction. So it's a quick intro on me, but I'll let you go ahead, Damien.
No, thanks for that. So I founded GreenWorks ESG, an ESG platform that helps companies streamline their ESG reporting and data management. I founded it 4 years ago. I actually am not from a career in sustainability at all, but I was actually in the energy industry in sales and marketing. And I just saw all these great advancements for that industry moving forward with reducing their environmental footprint. And none of it was finding it into corporate sustainability reports or these metrics into helping the industry. So really the founding of GreenWorks is effectively a giant passion project for me to help Canadian companies quantify their achievements on their environmental, social, and governance initiatives so that we can actually promote Canadian businesses again and have Canadians proud of Canadian businesses and Canadian industries. But that really starts with how do we streamline it, make it cost effective for them. And we've done that with our ESG platform.
Okay, so excited to dive into the platform and the whole idea of ESG, right? So let's start at the ground level, right? So they say like explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old, right? So in your words, what is ESG, right? Because I hear a lot about ESG on the news, and we're in the energy industry, so I see the E part every day in my work. But tell us, what is ESG and why should we even care about it?
It's a great question, and really you can take ESG and you can take sustainability, and there's a lot of people think they're the same thing. But effectively, the easiest way to summarize it and kind of bring it down to layman's terms for everyone is the fact that sustainability and sustainability reporting has been part of corporate reporting since the 80s. It has always been there, but roughly less than 10% of companies were actually including something in it with real substance. Most of them were, here's 2 or 3 things that we do great, and let's sweep the rest under the rug. What ESG did when it was effectively, it came to prominence about 5 years ago, was it established the fact that we need quantitative metrics to prove that you're doing what you say you're doing, and really through almost a financial lens. In the same way you do corporate financial reporting, we were looking, or these ESG frameworks that came to prominence that have been around for 10 plus years, but really came to prominence in the last 5 years. That's what they were trying to establish. Let's take all these great initiatives you're doing, but let's make quantitative data so you can back them up so anyone can understand them. So they're really 2 different things. It was sustainability and ESG is that due diligence that an investor or any stakeholder wants to look into your business. In the same way they would want to look into your financials, they want to look into what is your strategy for climate change, for water usage, for diversity, equity, inclusion, for Indigenous engagement, and I mean 700 plus metrics within the different ESG frameworks, and maybe that's another good place to start, and then just kind of break apart. There's really two pieces to it. Again, sustainability reporting, been around since the 80s. This is what we do and why we're wonderful. And then what these ESG frameworks came out, and they're global frameworks, came out where they said within your industry, these are the metrics you really should be reporting to, and in the same way you do with your financial disclosures. But up until this year, they've been completely voluntary, so anyone can kind of pick and choose what they were reporting against, and allowing a lot of confusion in terms of you can't really do apples to apples comparison even within an industry when you get to cherry pick the metrics you want to report to. And this is what's evolving into the next stage of ESG, which is going from voluntary disclosures to mandatory disclosures, which really are on our doorstep as Canadian companies, and we really do need to get ahead of it.
Mm-hmm. So just before getting into mandatory versus voluntary and getting deeper into the regulations, I just want to understand, as a business owner, right? So I know that the more ESG type of objectives you have in your business, I personally believe that it actually benefits the bottom line. It benefits the investors. It benefits society at large. Yeah, for sure. Right. It benefits all your stakeholders. It benefits the environment. But I think it actually makes business sense, right? Because employees are looking to work at purpose-driven companies, right? Investors are looking to invest in purpose-driven companies as well, right? So just before we take that step further and get into the whole conversation of mandatory versus voluntary disclosure and all those kinds of things, what do you see, from a macro perspective, from a general landscape? Like, where is this all headed, right? Because I have conversations with people and say business should just be about making money, right? It doesn't. The environment is somebody else's responsibility. Business should be about making money. I don't believe that, but I think there is that counter argument. So what do you say to that, and what do you think about that overall?
Yeah, it's such a great question, because I hear this all the time. Businesses should do what they do best, which is make financial profit for their stakeholders. But if you look at it, let's look at it through the lens of just two stakeholders within a business. One, let's talk about the investors. And if you're investing in a company and they need an enormous amount of water to run their operations, and there's a water shortage, water issue within maybe their jurisdiction, then you need a lens inside that. How about all these the big tech companies that are now getting into AI, where you're going from CPUs to GPUs, and a GPU takes 100 times or maybe 1,000 times more power than an old CPU. So as we move into this generation of AI technology, and you're asking these server farms to produce or just drain 1,000 times more energy, shouldn't we, as just a society, know exactly what the level of energy that they're consuming? And then the other, so that's on that investor or when looking to invest in a company. But let's take the other stakeholder of employees. One of the best way to bring on new employees or to retain your employees is through sustainability, especially when we're talking about Gen Z and millennials. There's stat after stat after stat that's actually what they're looking for when they start with a new company. Is what is their sustainability program? Is this a company I can be proud of? Maybe is a better way to summarize it. So if you look at just those two different stakeholders, regardless of mandatory or voluntary, you're going to satisfy both with being on top of your sustainability program.
Understood. So now I think we can dive in a little bit deeper and get into the whole conversation of voluntary reporting, and now there's mandates coming out for basically there's going to be mandated reporting, right, coming out. So walk us through the landscape on reporting and sort of how it looks right now and where you see it going over the next couple of years.
Well, there's been some pretty simple guidelines that have been put out. We'll actually take a little time machine back to last June when the IFRS, so that's the standard body for financial reporting, the IFRS, which is adopted by effectively every 130 security commissions around the world, on again that financial reporting for publicly traded companies. They got effectively into the ESG framework business with their new standards, ISSB. So this is now their sustainability standards, and launched S1, S2 last June with the idea that they would go into effect January 1st, 2024. So now that they are in effect, the question becomes, when does it become mandatory? And so now there's a series of timelines that Canadian businesses need to understand, because when the new frameworks were announced in June, the CSA immediately endorsed them, and then looked at that as we all looked at that as very positive, that the CSA will make them mandatory, and effectively now going into effect January 1st, we have a March 13th date where Canadian companies are allowed to engage with the CSSB, that is the Canadian version of the ISSB. They can engage with them, question and answer, and a series of discussions on how this is going to affect Canadian businesses. We do feel that once that is done, it is now just the road to mandatory reporting for 2025 is pretty clear for everyone that's kind of lives and breathes ESG like we do over here at GreenWorks.
Okay, interesting. And then, so who is going to be mandated to report, right? So on the energy side, I don't know if you're familiar, but there's the energy and water reporting and benchmarking tool that came out through Energy Star, and then they started mandating, larger buildings, and then they kind of went down based on square footage. Do you foresee the same type of structure happening here, where it's going to be the big banks start and the really big corporations starting, and then slowly funneling down through to everybody, or how do you see that shaping up?
Well, you can kind of put it in three buckets. So you can start with, again, the IFRS and the fact that the CSA has endorsed it. And then you look at that, well, that takes care of all publicly traded companies right off the bat. So now if you're a publicly traded company in Canada on the TSX or TSX Venture, this is now going to affect your company, and the fact that you not only have to report, but the accuracy to that reporting, credibility to that reporting. You understand that at some point this will require third-party audits. The next bucket is the OFSI. So this is the governing body for the Canadian banks, insurance companies, trusts. They're already mandated. They already have mandatory reporting for those banks, insurance companies, and trusts for 2024. So that means that every Canadian bank needs to do a climate disclosure by next March of 2025. We also know that the plan is that those disclosures come out March 2025. Immediately thereafter, banks are going to be asked to do financial emissions. So this is now the banks providing the emissions for every company that they're lending capital to. So if you use a bank, which every company does, you are now going to be asked about this in 2025. And we're already seeing that. TD, Scotia, RBC. RBC just asked one of our clients this a couple of weeks ago, which is a smaller, we'll call it quote unquote mom and pop company. In their annual review, ESG immediately came up. So they were ahead of the game. So they were super happy with us. And then the federal government. And in November, the federal government very clearly stated that climate disclosures are not just for publicly traded companies. They are looking at making it mandatory for all Canadian companies, regardless of private or public. So you think between those three buckets, it's going to affect every company. And I think the biggest thing right now is how do you educate them so that it doesn't cost them a fortune going forward? Because I can absolutely see and understand the anti-ESG sentiment, because it's costly and it's confusing. And should you do it wrong, there is the legal ramifications to it as well. So it's also scary. And so I can absolutely see why companies will want to push back against it, not knowing that there are affordable options out there, such as GreenWorks.
That's good. So speaking of the burden on businesses, right? I think, generally the political landscape right now, Canada is I'm hearing this a lot, and I don't know if it's true, but compared to, other G7 countries, we're kind of falling behind a little bit on productivity. And there's that whole conversation around, is it the fact that we have so much bureaucracy, or is it something else that's making us kind of fall behind on productivity, right? So I don't want to get too political here, but I just want to hear from your side of the table. This is going to be now a new burden on business, right? So if I'm running small manufacturing, I'm running, a business, and I already have my table full with all the other stuff that I have to deal with, right? Now, this is just one more thing that the government is mandating me to have to manage, right? So, how do you see that shaping up? And then how do you see GreenWorks being able to hopefully rectify some of that and avoid the time that managers, founders are going to have to spend on doing this reporting and meeting these mandates?
Yeah, I think the big reason that Canada's, slow to catch up to places like Europe that is so far ahead, it really comes down to a really simple thing that we hear all the time. I know you guys hear it over at Edgecom all the time, that Canadian companies are not first movers; they're fast followers. And I mean, we were in a round table with some political leaders last summer, and they expressed this as Canadian companies would rather be fifth than first because they are so risk averse at being first movers. To which I asked the leadership in the room, well, like, what is the Canadian leadership doing to help offset some of the concern and risk with it? Because it's pretty straightforward. If you wait to be fifth to get in on, it's going to cost you substantially more, maybe probably 5 times more than jumping in and being a first mover and an innovative company. So I think that's the big thing that as Canadians and Canadian companies we need to look at is how do we mitigate some of that risk for being a first mover and taking that first foot forward and being a leader in this space instead of a laggard.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Do you think that there's going to be some incentives or some programs that are going to help make these easier other than using software platforms such as yourself? Do you think that there's going to be some other support or help from the government to ease businesses into this?
We've seen some small grant programs, more provincially driven, to help companies. But the reality is what companies need is the education to get their head around what's coming and what they need to do to prepare for it. And then they need systems in place to be able to make sure that it's accurate data and they're not just relying on spreadsheets that are being passed around from colleague to colleague before some inaccurate data gets out there. I think that's the biggest piece is how do we educate companies on what is coming and how to prepare for it and get ahead of it. Because if you wait to the last minute, we're seeing it already. The Canadian government passed Bill S211 last April, which is the Modern Slavery Act, which to not comply with it by the end of March of this year means a $250,000 fine. And yet every Canadian company basically slept on that until the fall. And then we and other consulting companies in Canada were actually inundated with companies scrambling to understand how they have to do these reports. It's going to be the same with any of these mandatory climate disclosures unless companies get ahead of it. And to get ahead of it is the education part. So I think more conversations with those organizations and just with anybody out there that is working, as collaborative groups, committees, get together with your peers and discuss what they're doing. It's so invaluable for staying ahead of this and make sure that it doesn't get you blindsided.
Okay, so education is a huge component, right? So if I'm a business owner that's going to be mandated to report, let's say by next year, what's the first thing I should do right now so education, talk to my, if there's an association I'm a part of, or reach out to, ESG type companies to get educated. Is that the first thing I should do? And then beyond that, what's the next thing I should do to sort of get ahead of this?
Well, knowing that the standardization is probably going to come through the IFRS and this ISSB standards, S1, S2 that came out, all of that can be accessed online, and even the kind of Q&A and be involved in that collaborative process that starts March 13th, you can find online at ifrs.com. So you can educate yourself if you want, or you can, again, work with consulting firms or organizations like ours that can help you through the process. The companies that have been reporting for years now using these other frameworks, which one being SASB and one being TCFD. SASB is an all-encompassing framework out of Europe that any company that's been reporting to that over the last couple of years is going to set themselves up wonderfully on all the non-climate related topics within these mandatory disclosures. Companies that have been using TCFD, which is a climate related framework out of New York, will be way ahead with the IFRS, ISSB new mandatory frameworks, because they basically use those two as the foundations to build off of. So you've got these companies that are way ahead because they've already been, leaders in their industry by reporting against SASB, TCFD. If you have no idea what those are, no idea what ISSB is, it is a quick consultation call just to walk through some of the things that you need to understand, that you need to get ahead of. And it isn't as overwhelming as some people think. I think that's the other piece to it. Once you sit down and have a 30-minute walkthrough about what you actually need to do, it isn't as overwhelming as most people think it's going to be.
That's good to hear. I mean, similar to energy, right? There's so many acronyms and there's so many bodies that are involved, and it just gets really overwhelming. So just a plug here. So if you subscribe to the Edgecom Energy newsletter, we'll make sure that any sort of regulations and any sort of news that's coming out, we'll keep you posted, and we'll make sure that clients are well aware. And we'll work on some of that content together and make sure that customers and the whole, all the attendees are aware of the changes that are coming down the pipe. So speaking of reporting, and I think, there's been reporting for years now, and you touched on this a little bit earlier, right? So the whole concept of Excel sheets and inaccurate data, and where's this information even coming from, right? So I've read some ESG reports, and then the data doesn't really make sense in some cases, right? So you can just tell that it's a non-energy person or a non-sustainability person who's put some of these numbers together, and they're either outdated or even just wrong, right? Just flat out wrong. So can you kind of touch on why accurate data is going to be so important for this ESG reporting, and how that'll impact, the overall reporting landscape coming up?
Yeah, I think it can be summarized in a conversation I had with the head of ESG for the New York Stock Exchange back in November, where he summarized it as spreadsheets are for estimates, not for data collection. And we see this all the time with the amount of companies that we go into, where they have been reporting for years, and they will openly admit that they have no idea where the data lives within their organization that is sitting in that ESG report. It is sometimes quite shocking when we onboard onto our system that they can't find the actual backing data for some of the metrics that are in their reports. And I think that's really is the key. And we see that constantly. We see that with the greenwashing lawsuits that are out there, the 5,000 plus that are sitting in litigation right now. It really does come down to they didn't have the backing data to prove some of the statements that they were referring to within the report. And it just comes full cycle to, if you don't have a way to prove out the process and methodology to how you got that data, then where's the credibility within it?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think this is one place where Edgecom Energy is definitely, we're putting a lot of time and a lot of effort, right? So gathering energy data has really been our core offering now for a while, and analyzing that data and getting insights from that data, but now using that same energy data to provide real-time sustainability reporting for these ESG reports, right? We had a meeting with a bank about a year ago, one of the big Canadian banks, and any data that comes in has a delay of 2 to 3 months before they can put it in their reports, because they got to wait for the bills to come in. And imagine you have thousands of branches waiting for all those bills to come in, aggregating all that data. So that's where we think IoT is going to be a really, really significant step in moving us forward to almost having real-time visibility on ESG, and then eventually being able to track that in some sort of dashboard and being able to manage it as events happen and as things happen. So excited to work with GreenWorks on that, and it's something that that's been in the works now for a couple of years, and I think it's really going to help both of our clients navigate these new regulations and make sure that they're actually you're going to do the work anyways to do the reporting. So why not have accurate and up-to-date information? And then eventually that's going to be mandated that you have, a backup of, what is this meter? Where is this data coming from? Right. And it's all going to be audited eventually. So I think that's one place where we've really seen a lot of interest, and I think it's going to help clients meet these mandates relatively quickly. What do you think on that real-time data part of the equation?
It's one of the first things we recommend to all of our clients. If you have information in other digital sources and other technology partners, we are always going to say yes to running an API between our systems and removing the human error and inaccuracy of double inputting systems. We always encourage that right off the top, because if you can actually have all of your data from the source, and not only the accuracy of it, but just the time, effort, energy, and peace of mind of that is worth so much to a company.
Yeah. So in terms of, the time and the effort that's required, right? So what are the financial ramifications of ESG reporting right now, right? So again, we know that it's voluntary, and then over time it's going to be mandated, and there's going to be fines, and we know that that's where it's headed. But what are the trends looking for the financial impacts of having to do these reports right now and then into the future? Do you see things like, LLMs and generative AI coming in and making this cheaper over time? Do you see it really changing over time? What are the trends and what are the financial impacts of this ESG reporting as it stands? And then where do you see it trending moving forward?
In terms of the financial impact on the business, if they don't report, or sorry, in terms of the financial impact to have accurate reporting, I guess, like the cost on.
Yeah. So
I think
there's both sides, right? There's both sides.
Yeah.
So I think again, as a business owner, what is it going to cost me to make sure that I am, that I'm on top of all these regulations, right? I guess, and then where are those costs headed over time?
Yeah, I think the financial impacts are very clear on not getting ahead of this and reporting on this. Again, those stakeholders, whether it's investors, whether it's your employees, or whether it's any of your other stakeholders, the impact's pretty clear on that side of things. And then the financial impact to a company to be able to stay on top of this, I think, is one of the more interesting conversations, because you've seen all these reports. I'm sure you've seen the same ones I've seen, where they talk about it could be over $500,000 a year for a company to be able to do accurate climate reporting, which 100% is going to cost them that much today. But as technology gets better, as products like GreenWorks keep getting more and more efficient to help companies with all sides, not just the on the E side of it, but the S and the G, it's going to streamline everything so much for companies, and the cost, time, effort. But again, that peace of mind at the end of the report, where they can go front facing with their disclosure and have no regrets. That's the great line we took away from an IFRS conversation on Wednesday, where they talked about the IFRS framework, and they referred to it as the no regret strategy. So this idea previously to ESG reporting is that you go put out a whole bunch of information about your company, and you're not incredibly careful with it. It can put you in some hot water and literally put you into court with greenwashing legal lawsuits. With the strategy around the IFRS, which is really interesting how they framed it, was the fact that get out in front of it, start reporting. It is going to be that no regrets strategy, where you can report exactly what they're asking of you, and that's all they're asking of you. Just let's put out the data. And then move on and continue on with your business. The costs of that are just going to keep coming down as everyone starts building. I mean, it's the strength in numbers, really. When we talk about this cost management, it is absolutely going to come down over time.
Yeah, I definitely see that happen. I mean, that's where IoT comes in, right? And I think over time, all these software solutions, as they get more all-encompassing, then the cost per unit for each end user actually ends up going down quite a bit, and it's the economies of scale, right? And I think that's the beauty of software, is that it makes things much easier and much quicker. One other thing I want to touch on, and I think there's auxiliary benefits to this, right? So again, coming from an energy background, one of the things that I noticed is, when we're talking to clients about saving energy and reducing their peak demand, um, everyone likes to save costs. Everyone likes to reduce their emissions. But one of the things that really moves the needle is the fact that now you're going to have this energy data. It's also going to help you operate your facility more efficiently, right? So this is data that's actually going to help you not just in energy, but it's going to help you operate your facility. It's going to help you operate, understand HR parameters better, occupancy of your building and those kinds of things. So this data, as it starts getting cleaned up and as it becomes more real time, I think there's other values beyond what we're doing in sustainability. I think not only is sustainability beneficial to the bottom line, but I think there's other auxiliary benefits to having this data and doing this reporting and doing a deep dive on real time data and emissions factors and all those kinds of things, right? Have you seen that with your clients? Is that something that, it's kind of like a kick in the pants to, clean up your data, right? And sort of get ahead of things on the operational side of things as well. Have you noticed that?
Oh, 100%. And I mean, it is actually working with companies like Edgecom where you really see those benefits, right? Where we're going to help clients and companies report accurate data, and then working with partners like Edgecom where you can actually see this improved performance within these metrics that clearly have a financial impact on their business. If they're reducing these energy costs, if they're improving stuff on the DEI side of things, there's absolutely a financial impact when you have but first you've got to get to your actual what is our actual baseline data before we can improve upon it. And then that's why we have so many great partners globally that help us with that, including Edgecom. Oh, Behdad, I lost your sound. I don't know if it's a me thing or a you thing. No, I've completely lost your sound. You can hear me. I can't hear you. But yes, everyone can hear me. Behdad? No, I can't. I still can't hear you, Behdad. I can ramble on about something else if you want. While we're getting the mic. Oh, you do want me to ramble on about other stuff. If in the question period you want to jump to the next question on the chat, I can answer that on the chat.
Can you hear me now?
Oh yeah, I can hear you now.
Oh, there we go. Okay, I had to just switch to the laptop microphones. Sorry about that. A little bit of technical difficulties. It seems like my AirPods just wanted to disconnect, and this microphone didn't want to work either. So it's okay. It happens. So let me just take one step back, right? So we where I was going before the microphone issue is the pushback on ESG, right? And we touched on it a little bit at the beginning, but there's been some news there's been some press in the news about Florida specifically, right? So I think it's their pension fund said they don't want to hear anything about ESG. We're just looking at the bottom line, and there's again some pushback on it. So what do you think that's gonna do to the future, and where do you think this trend is gonna go, right? Because we've had conversations with clients that are saying, okay, we'll deal with ESG when we have to, or this stuff might just go away and we're not gonna have to deal with it, right? So there is that kind of pendulum that swings on the environmental and the ESG front, but specifically on the Florida topic and on some of these pension funds, going all the way the other way and saying, don't even talk to us about ESG. What do you think about that? And where do you think the trend is headed in that space?
Well, we've actually done a deep dive on the 39 states that have anti-ESG legislation. And it's actually all pretty reasonable. Most of it is just saying we want fiduciary responsibility within the pension funds. And that being that the pensioners should get the biggest return on their investment financially so they can retire. Nobody's arguing that. But going back to what ESG really is, it's the due diligence on the full spectrum of that business. So it's they're reliant on water. There's a water shortage. They for any of these. Oh, there seems to be an echo on my my side. I don't know. Oh, more technical fun.
Is that better, Christine? Sorry about that.
Oh, that's better on my side. There's no echo on my side now. Perfect. I love it. Good old technical fun. Yeah, I'll quickly rip through the U.S. specifically, and we'll just take a look at this. Is that once you actually dive into the anti-ESG state by state, because there are 39 states that have this in their state Supreme Court, it's pretty reasonable. Financial returns should be number one. Couldn't agree more.
Yep.
You look at Florida and the absurdity of some of the theater around ESG, though, specific to Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Think about DeSantis has done as the governor of Florida. He has told the big investment funds, these institutional investors, they're not allowed to reference an ESG report when investing in a state-owned business in Florida. So all you've really done is put up a barrier saying that if you're an investment fund and you want to look at an ESG report, you're not allowed to effectively invest in Florida. Mm-hmm. Also, how would you police that? There's absolutely no way to police the fact that someone at BlackRock is looking through their due diligence on ESG when investing. So there's no way to police it. It's complete political theater and just completely absurd on all fronts. But again, to go back to that piece where I completely understand why a C-suite would want ESG just to go away, because the ROI on it is really hard to find when you have a great ESG score, a great looking report, versus the downside if you get caught in a greenwashing lawsuit. And we want to help our clients with both. We want to help them put out a great report, but before you do, we'll also use our AI technology to go through your report and give you a legal analysis on here's some red flags you need to be aware of before you go front facing. Because I do think that peace of mind when those reports go out are as important as having great messaging and great narrative around all these positive things you're doing. And then if we can get our heads around that part, that it's not such a big risk if you're just following those guidelines. And that is part of the reason that companies do like this IFRS coming into it and having a standardized template where it's going to be apples to apples with your peers. So you're feel like you're putting your best foot forward, but they've tweaked or cherry picked how they're going to report, which has been some of the complaints in the past. If that goes away, everyone's reporting on the same thing, then it's just going to be in everyone's best interest. And then the other flip side that I always talk about is, again, if sustainability report has been around since the 80s, it had no teeth to it, absolutely nothing for the first almost 40 years it's been around. And now ESG came about. It's got a lot of flaws, and that's part of the positive side of the anti-ESG piece, is it's had that sustainability community really look at what's being put out there and fix a lot of imperfections in what was originally being proposed. So there is a positive side to this for sure as well.
Interesting. So now, changing gears a little bit, you mentioned AI, right? So, where do you see AI? Because I was listening to a podcast recently. It was almost like a TED stage, and someone was talking about how each query that you put through ChatGPT uses 500 milliliters of water and just kilowatt hours of a crazy amount of kilowatt hours of energy, right? And we know that to be the case, right? So it's the exact numbers I don't remember, but it's a lot, right? Now we're using AI, we're using IoT, we're using new technologies that are ideally helping offset emissions and improve sustainability and help manage governance and all these kinds of things. But how do you see the trend shaping up over AI? Do you see some pushback coming on the efficiency side of things? And the second part to that question is, do you see AI and again, machine learning being a huge benefit to ESG reporting, or do you see it kind of fizzling out a little bit and going back to different types of technologies?
Well, we'll look at it through both lenses because it is quite interesting. It's a bit ironic in certain ways that this boom in AI on an environmental standpoint, again, to my point earlier, the GPU versus CPU is 1,000 times more energy intensive.
Mm-hmm.
But your point about water is such a great point that most people wouldn't even think about the fact that these server farms need to be cooled. Cooling takes water. Now we're into environmental concern number 2. And then the flip side is we love our AI assistant, Ask Ellie, the little green elephant that helps you through your ESG reporting, finding your data, aggregating your data, but then at the end, doing analysis on you versus your peers and greenwashing concerns. So we love the AI within our platform. And I think that's to that point, what took us a senior level ESG advisory team a week to do, we can now streamline and do in about an hour at a more junior level, having it with our AI and then giving it to our more experienced advisors for them to analyze the data and make sure that the AI is correct, because you still need that human intelligence tied in with the artificial intelligence to make sure that they didn't miss anything. But enormous time saver for us right now and to help our clients. And the speed to which we can see it progressing is just, I can't even guess what's the next 6 to 12 months are going to look like for being able to help our clients.
Yeah, these things always start large and clunky and inefficient, and then over time we learn how to sort of squeeze every last drop out of them, right? So hopefully with AI that happens quicker than other computing shifts that we've had, right? Good. So yeah, I definitely think AI and LLMs are going to be a huge part of energy and sustainability moving forward. So cool name, by the way, Ask Ellie. I like that. So now shifting gears a little bit on the regulations, back to the regulation. So how do you see Canada comparing to the US and EU in terms of mandatory regulations, right? You touched on it a little bit at the beginning, but are we competitive? Are we close? Is it going to be something that's going to help Canadian industry, or is it something that's going to hinder our progress?
I'll actually steal more of that conversation from the head of ESG for the New York Stock Exchange, because he summarized it beautifully. Was the fact that if you look at North America and you look at mandatory reporting, so they're looking towards Europe and the CSRD, which came into effect January 1st as well, but was announced last January. So basically the CSRD said, here is all European companies and companies that work in Europe, what they're going to need to do in 2024, 2026, 2028, and so forth. And then as 2023 progressed, a lot of those, it almost seemed like they were making changes on a monthly basis on what was actually going to be required. And then there was reliefs on certain things, and certain things were pushed out. And on the American side, on the SEC side, they're looking very closely at that, because they have no interest historically in playing around with these requirements. Once they put it in place, it's now locked in, and it is in place for good. And the other interesting dynamic about the SEC is the fact that with their presidential election coming up this November, they will have to make decisions before May, or if there's an incumbent that comes in, they can overturn all of it if they don't make it by May. So we're kind of looking very closely at the SEC regarding some decisions on this by May. For Canada, the reality is we compete in a global market, and we need to compete. And so we need to then align with the other 130 ISCO countries, so that the CSA, we fully believe will have this as a mandatory requirement starting January 1st, 2025 for all publicly traded companies. Like I say, OFSI, for the Canadian Banks Insurance Companies Trust, is already in place. We fully expect them to stay with their plan that they need to do financial emissions in 2025. And again, the federal government basically blanketing everyone with the legislation back in their budget review in November. again, we can see as Canadians where this is going. We're not like the US where we can be independent of the rest of the globe. So we're just going to fall in line with Europe. And that's part of the idea that this, the devil's advocate, what if this just all goes away tomorrow? I mean, there's no way we're putting the genie back in the bottle.
I agree. Yeah, no, definitely. And I think what it could be, especially on the mining front, especially, when I think about batteries for EVs and all the investment, especially in Ontario, the major battery plants that are coming in Ontario, and we could have a full, circular supply chain. We have the mines, we have most of the materials that we need for these batteries. And, one of the big concerns is, who's mining these and what's the labor involved? And I think Canada could really play a big role on that. And, having these mandated reports would actually make people feel better that they're buying from a company that is, not using slave labor and all those kinds of nasty things that go on in the battery industry. So getting into sectors and sort of businesses, speaking of batteries, right? So, Canada competes on a global stage, as you mentioned. We have some key industries that employ a lot of people. Oil and gas being one of them, auto manufacturing being one of them, agriculture being one of them. How do you see our big industries being impacted with these reporting requirements coming down the line? And over time, which businesses and industries do you really think are going to be impacted first, right? So we talked about the banking sector a little bit, but beyond banking, which sectors do you think are going to be impacted first? And over time, how do you see that funneling through?
Yeah, actually, you made a good point a minute ago in terms of like the tiebreaker idea with the issue and with a great sustainability plan. Because I actually heard this on an anti-ESG rant, or I listened to this on an anti-ESG rant on a podcast a couple of weeks ago, where that gentleman was saying the only benefit is maybe a tiebreaker. And I'm like, that's a pretty good benefit when you think about it. And that's really when we talk about why GreenWorks was started in the first place. As someone who worked in the Canadian energy industry for 20 plus years before starting GreenWorks, and saw all these incredible technology and just even process innovations to reduce the environmental footprint, and how the amazing regulation hoops that they have to jump through on the environmental side. Seeing that and knowing what the Canadian industry has to go through, and not just energy, but like say agriculture, mining, all of the Canadian industries should be so proud of what they do on a regulatory framework that they're already doing, because the provincial and the federal governments are already mandating it. Now let's just take that, move that over to your ESG report, follow along with the IFRS guidelines, and you can actually be the tiebreaker when it comes to competing with other industries across in other jurisdictions. I think that is our big Canadian competitive advantage. And obviously the industries, to your point, of which are most impacted, the high emitting industries are obviously the most concerned, because of the fact that, again, the banks doing financial emission disclosures in a year from now means that their highest emission inputting clients, there's going to be concern there. There's no question. And they're going to have to find a way to bring those emissions down. Because can you lend capital if you're under the microscope as a Canadian bank, that you've got this many emissions, and then when you bring in your financial emissions, it balloons up, and then what are you going to do moving forward? So I think this just comes down to Canadian innovation, and even though, like we talked about before, the reluctancy to be first movers, that's first movers outward, and the bravado piece that we don't do very well as Canadians. But in terms of first movers for great technology and innovation, I mean, you know as well as I do, just there's so much great innovation in this country to reduce so many of the E factors, but also to improve stuff on the S, the social, the Indigenous relationships. There's so much innovation happening. I'm not concerned at all about, industry to industry. If we can showcase that we have the best in the world, I mean, that's when we get Canadians proud of Canadian industry again. And that's, again, going back to this is all just a big passion project for us over at GreenWorks, because we're so proud of Canadian industry, and we think all Canadians should be.
I agree. We got to maintain that competitiveness And again, we're doing a lot to do things in a better way, right? So there's a lot of regulations, there's a lot of work that Canada is doing, and in most cases, why is it that we don't in a lot of cases we can't compete on price on certain things? Well, it's because whoever's doing it overseas is probably not having to jump through those hoops, and there's a lot of corners being cut, and there's a lot of, for sure, there's some productivity differences as well, but I think there's also a big part of it is, what are the environmental regulations? Is it okay if I dump this water just straight down the drain, or am I going to have to filter it before it goes? So there's a lot of rules that protect us, but I don't think we do as good of a job as we should, putting a report card beside that product and saying, look, made in Canada, and this is what it means. Sure, it might be a little bit more expensive, but here are all the other benefits that this, we have some of the cleanest grids in the world, right? We have some of the strictest regulations for employee protections, right? So I think those are things that are already built into Canadian industry, and I think we have to definitely do a better job reporting it and making sure that the world knows about it, right? So I'm going to get to sort of the last part of it. I want to give you a chance to give a closing statement, and then we'll get to some questions from the audience if we have any. So if you want to leave the audience with one takeaway about ESG, what would it be? What's the one thing that they should remember from this conversation?
I hope I'm still not echoing. I just noticed this comment that I'm echoing. I don't know how to fix it if I am, so I apologize. But the one takeaway is Canadian companies are already doing it. We see this all the time. They are already doing it all. If you're a big publicly traded company, you're regulated by so many provincial and federal standards. You're already doing it in so many different ways. But even smaller private companies, we see it all the time. They're not perfect, but they all care about the environment. They all care about social causes. Take what you're already doing. Let's highlight it based on this guidance and the structure. And sometimes it is a little tough, but the reality is it's not that big a lift to move it from what you're already doing to the structure of these frameworks to make sure that you're compliant when it becomes mandatory. But let's say, again, devil's advocate, this all just goes away. Mm-hmm. Now what you have is a great promotional material to promote what a great company you are. It's not a terrible downside to going through this effort if you can now have some of the best marketing material you've ever had and showcasing all the great environmental, social, and governance achievements your company's doing.
Fantastic. So again, thanks, Demian, for taking the time to be on the podcast with us. And I want to remind everyone to sign up for the Edgecom Energy newsletter. We will be sharing a lot more information, and we're doing a lot of work simplifying these rules and putting it in our blog and making sure that clients can really understand in an easy way, in a digestible way, what all these changes mean and what are all the different things that they have to do. Again, Edgecom Energy, we're working very closely with Demian and the whole GreenWorks team to give them that data for real-time energy analysis. And hopefully over time, more and more clients are really reporting on the right data, and we'll help you gather that data and acquire that data quickly and easily and get it into your ESG report. So again, I want to thank you for your time, Demian. Now what we'll do is we'll open it up for audience questions. We have quite a few real-time audience members right now on LinkedIn and on various platforms. So if you have any questions, please drop it in the chat. We have a few minutes left until we reach the top of the hour. So Demian and I are here to help. And if you have any questions, just drop them in the chat.
Yeah, thanks Behdad for inviting us along. Again, it's been a pleasure working with you and your team since we got started and we got connected. It's probably been a couple of years now. And so it is exciting. And again, going back to the innovation that's happening in Canada, it is pretty exciting to talk and work with so many great companies across Canada that are helping in so many of these different spaces. And like I say, I think that's going to keep the cost down. It's going to streamline it, and it's going to make it more efficient for everyone moving forward. And again, a better, on the altruistic side, a better planet for everyone, which I think is also important.
Yeah, we can have a win-win, right? I mean, that's the goal, right? Better businesses, Absolutely. Better planet. I think it's definitely possible, right? We just got to keep working towards it.
It's definitely not binary. The idea that a great ESG performance being good for how you impact the world, and also turns into a more profitable company, because now you've looked into the full lens of your organization and how it impacts on so many of these different metrics. It's definitely full circle.
Okay, fantastic. So if you have any questions, you can email us. And again, don't forget to sign up for the Edgecom Energy newsletter. And Demian, have a happy family day long weekend, and hope you take care of yourself, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks for that. You have a great long weekend as well. And thanks for everyone for joining on the Friday of a long weekend. It's very much appreciated.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Take care.